going to be talking about smart language additions to Adobe ColdFusion 2025 with my good friend Ashudeep. And this is going to be a heck of a talk. It's going to be deep. It's going to be complex. It's going to be fun. And it's probably going to go long. So have your water, make sure you hydrate, have a really comfortable chair. And reminder, if you have questions, and you will, I guarantee it because I have questions, please put them in the Q&A chat, and we have engineers ready to go ahead and answer those questions as we go along. So without further ado, here's Ashudeep.
Hello, good morning and good evening, everyone. Welcome to the session of exploring the smart language additions in CFML. With the CF Next release, we are bringing some changes in the language. About me, I am Ashudeep. I am having an overall experience of 14 years. And over this period of time, I have worked on distributed systems, query engine, and storage interests me more. And from past 7 years, I'm working with Adobe and with the ColdFusion engineering team. I'm working mostly on language. Apart from language, I've worked on CF query, databases, ORM, and GraphQL. So yeah, let's start off. So the agenda for today. So we have done significant changes in our language for this release. And a part of them consists of changes in query of query. And then we have introduced multi-assign operators. There have been changes in built-in functions. So we have added some new functions as well as modified a few ones to take care of the additional functionalities. Destructuring we implemented in ColdFusion 2021, but it was a bit incomplete in the sense that it was not supported for function parameters. So we brought a completion to those by implementing functions parameter destructuring. Then with respect to query caching, our query caching we thought was kind of static. It was not depending on the access patterns of the query. So we try to enable certain attributes wherein user can dynamically configure the queries based on certain attributes. Then there have been some thread functionality enhancements. Some new constructs have been added. So like trailing commas and multi-catch, and some operators. So we have done some changes in Alvis operator, and we have introduced a new null coalescing operators because of certain problems that our fellow developers were having while implementation. Yeah. So let's start off with query of query. So query of query. So I hope many of you might be using query of query because we do certain operations, and when it's not about having a single database in operation, right? You want to combine the operations or data from multiple databases, and you do want to do some operations like database operations. So we use query of query, which is also known as in-memory query. So till now, we were doing simple operation based on certain columns, and all those things were allowed. But some things like when the column is having prefix table names, all those operations are having problems. So we try to enhance it. So now all these operations with prefix table names are allowed. We have also introduced the modulus operators. So we had addition, subtraction, multiplication, and some other operators, but modulus functionality was one of the things that were lagging and which are almost there in every database. So we implemented that. So basically you can do an operation that basically on any column, you can apply the modulus operator, store it somewhere, and you can get and print the result for that. Apart from modulus operators, there have been some addition of bitwise operators. So we actually tried to find out what is lacking in our query of query basic operations, and we felt that there were some bitwise operators that have not been implemented. So we implemented bitwise and inclusive or exclusive or and bitwise not as well as we found out that the recent addition of MySQL databases have the support for bitwise left shift and right shift. So those also we have added. So you can do these operations on different columns of a query. Then coming to multi-assign operators. So I'm pretty sure multi-assign operators are not some things that you are not familiar with. But here was the catch that these operators were allowed in statements. So something like A plus equal to B was supported, but those were not being allowed in the expression parts, right? So we have added the support for multi-assign, that is plus equal to, minus equal to, and many of those. So you can use them anywhere where you are using expression. So that if you want to do certain kind of task where you want to add the record as well as initialize the values. You don't want to do it again and again on a separate line. You can do it in the expression itself. So that has been added. Coming to built-in functions, so every time we introduce some of the essential functionalities, and that is what. So as a part of our release this year, we have added struct value array, list get duplicates, get property file, and get property and set property string methods, as well as enhance some other methods. So I'm just going to cover the added method first. So many of us use the struct as an data structure in ColdFusion, and there were options of getting values like getting keys. There was struct key array function, but there was no struct value, so you can get all the values stored in struct as an array. You can find the duplicates from a list, okay, using list get duplicates. And many of our users were also requesting that there should be a way to store key value pairs in file. So you can just give it as a key and value separately, or you can make a struct and that can be stored in a file using get property string and set property string method. You can store it in get property string is where you can retrieve the value for that. As coming to the enhancement part, so directory list, I'm pretty sure many of our developers use these functions regularly to access information about files, but there were some limitations related to that for directory list, the filters that we are trying to apply were only on path, type, and extension. But our file system provides certain other attributes, like these are the almost 8-9 attributes that are there. And due to which, since we can apply filtering on only these three, the directory list function was kind of inefficient, wherein you cannot write those things or filter on those attributes. So we have provided that. So now directory list functions also accepts a file attribute struct, wherein the keys can be one of these attributes, and you can try to filter the file attributes based on these. Okay, and I'm going to explain that in an example as well. We have modified the JavaCast function to support 2D array as well. So if there's 2D array and you want to do a JavaCast, you can do it right now. Output encoding attribute has been added to hash function, so you can specify the output encoding. Now duplicate. So many of us use the duplicate functionality for duplicating objects, and there are two concepts that you can do a shallow copy or a deep copy. Okay, but basically in our case it was only one type of supported. So deep copy is when you create a copy of the object, and shallow copy is when you have a reference to that as well, okay, to the original object. So we have introduced a deep copy parameter in this, and using which you can use to do either a deep copy or shallow copy. Then create object, and I'm pretty sure this is a function that most of the fellow developers used in one way or the other for creating objects of different types and all, right? But there was kind of a limitation that for now, let's say some classes for which you want to create objects, okay, that has to be located either in CFusion lib or it should be there in the class path. Okay, with this release, what we are bringing is that without restarting a server, let's say you want to just drop in a jar or a class and you want to load it in your CFML snippet, okay, you don't need to restart the server again and again, and you can just load it dynamically, okay, and create the object for that. And with ColdFusion 2021, we also introduced something called as case sensitive structs. So basically in that, when we were interoperating with the NoSQL type of systems, we wanted our struct keys to get preserved. So there was no way to deserialize the JSON and set that thing that whether you want the cases to be preserved for keys or not. So we added a parameter preserve case for struct key, using which you can specify it, you can pass on the value, and accordingly it will deserialize the JSON or the maps that keeps coming. So yeah, let's try to go into a bit of from a developer perspective that how things would look like for certain function. So this is our directory list function which expects the path, and then there are certain parameters, and then a closure that can be passed. So this is my filter by size closure. So earlier this filter by size closure was constrained to use only 3 attributes that were there, and those were type and extensions and size. Yeah, so part, type, and extension, those were the things. But going forward, you can filter on any attributes that our file system supports. So like you can apply a filter on the type, you can apply a filter on the last modified date if you want to filter using that. You can even apply based on the path, you can apply based on the size. So there are different attributes using which you can do filtering, and those calls will be much more efficient in that sense that you can right away reduce the number of results that you are trying to fetch rather than all the files. Coming to get property string and set property string. So that is what, like, set property string allows that you can set the keys and values, as well as what you can do is you can create or create a struct with all those keys. So here I've created a struct, okay, and with these keys and these values, and you can just use the set property string, which will write to a file in certain encoding. So in that manner, you can always store the keys and retrieve the keys from a file, okay, using these methods. Create object, right? So like I said right earlier, create object, we were trying to create an object of a class which, let's say, is not existing in the system, but we want to bring it in. So what we can do is we can just drop it at a particular location in our ColdFusion setup, and we just need to provide it as a path. So when we specify that path and we try to load that object, it's going to be loaded and you can use it as such. And I'm going to show it like in a demo. Then duplicate, right? So duplicate functionality. So here, if you see, like I mentioned, that we can create a deep copy as well as shallow copy. And by default, if we don't pass the value, it was assumed to be true. So deep copy is when, let's say, we have an object with certain first name, last name, and these attributes, and we want to do a deep copy, that is, make an exact copy of the object. You can go with the deep copy by specifying the duplicate. So as for backward compatibility, if you don't specify the next flag, it's going to by default do a deep copy. And if you want to do a shallow copy, you just pass this deep copy flag as false. And how it's going to vary is that, let's say, after creating this shallow copy, I changed the address, and in that, what I did was that street address I pointed from the street value I pointed from of the address attribute struct I pointed from 20 to 22. Okay, so in the shallow copy part, it's going to get changed, but in the deep copy, since it was an exact copy that we made, the values remains the same. So that is why when I dump these objects, if you see the original object that I have changed, the value reflects to be 22 here, as well as in shallow copy. But in the deep copy, we made a copy and not the original references. So it's going to point to the original value only. Yeah, destructuring. So I'm pretty sure that some of you might know about destructuring, and for some of you, let's think about and let's go through this, what this functionality is all about. So destructuring, it has been there in JavaScript as well as it came in from the ECMAScript concept, and this is basically you can unpack values from arrays as well as properties from objects into distinct variables. So when you don't want to do a single assignment, but do a direct assignment, multi-value assignment, right, with a statement, you can do that. And it's a very concise and expressive way to assign values to multiple variables just by using a small syntax. And for array destructuring, we do have the syntax like this, that using square brackets, you specify the keys or variable names that you want to assign. And on the right hand side, these can be the values. Now the number of values can exceed the number of keys as well, the variables that we are trying to initialize, and all the rest of the other values will get ignored. So you can directly assign rather than doing let's say n statements, doing it one again. And it's in a way efficient as well as concise and expressive way to do. Similarly, object structuring. So in object destructuring, what we can do is we have key and values. Okay, and this rval can again be a struct or a complex object using which we want to initialize these key values like key a1, and if you want to initialize some other key. And basically there is also an option to give the default value, so it has its own syntax. So if, let's say, the value that we are trying to initialize, this key, is not available on the right hand side, the default value will get initialized. So that's a way wherein, let's say you are using some third party APIs or a REST API or a function call which is returning a complex object, and that certain attributes are definitely going to be there in a certain structure. You can write the code in a way that it can always destructure it in itself. And basically where you are unsure about that some values might be missing. So you can definitely provide some default values for that. Okay, so you don't need to do a null checking or whether that value or key is defined or not. So this was already available till ColdFusion 2021, and there was one syntax that was lacked, and that is like using function destructuring, that is using destructuring in parameters for function. So so what it does is basically it unpacks the properties of objects that are passed as function parameters. So we are going to discuss about the syntax of that. So let's, in a way, revise the syntax first for object destructuring. As I mentioned, it is denoted by these brackets and then curly braces, and you can define the keys and then key values. So in a way, these keys, the values will be initialized to the corresponding keys here. In array destructuring, you just define the variables and the values, and they get automatically assigned to that. How does function parameters destructuring works, right? So let's say we have a display summary. In this, we have created a complex object, okay, which has a name attribute, basically a name key, and then scores is another structure which contains 3 attributes like maths, English, and science. These attributes, now when we pass a complex object, if these values are existing, then they gets initialized while calling. If there's one of those values, let's say, doesn't exist, then that gets initialized to 0 or whatever we have initialized. So in a way, you don't need to check it again and again whether the values are getting initialized, if it's null or not null. And it's like, whatever you require, that is available, and whatever has been supplied and it's not required, you can feel free to ignore that, right? So that's the power of destructure function parameters destructuring. And in a way, when we define these values in this manner, there is a scope limitation that you don't have unnecessary variables created. Only the values or names that you have defined, the attributes that you have defined, only those will be available in the function scope. So so let's talk about destructuring. It looks simpler, but it can be as complex as it can. So here is a simple example. From a developer perspective, we can say that we have a complex object of person type which has name and age attributes and certain values, and then location is again a struct which has certain other values like coordinates, can be arrays and all. And from this, I want to initialize only certain attributes. That is, I want to initialize like name, country, city, and the latitude and longitude keys in the coordinates, right? So what I need to do is I need to write the keys in a certain format, basically, and I can assign it to the person object. So if I see here, the name value will be initialized, the city will be initialized, even country is initialized. Coordinates, if I see, it's not initialized, right? I mean, coordinates is out of scope because we do have a what you call as child for coordinates, which is latitude and longitude. So those gets initialized. So in a way, if someone wants to remember this thing, what you can do is you can create a tree kind of structure for this, okay, complex, and you can find that any nodes that are at the child level or at the basic child level, so those are getting initialized, and if something that is root might not get initialized, so location here will not be initialized. So and this object can be as complex as it can. Now consider a use case just to understand destructuring, right? How it works and all, and why do we even bother about, or why do we even care about destructuring, right? So let's take an example wherein we understand that the ColdFusion release name. So we had certain releases, and every release has its own release name. So we have like 2016 it's Trajan, then 2021 was Project Stratus, last release was Fortuna, and this release is CF Next. Okay, so similar kind of, let's say, object or structure exists in our system, and that is assigned to CF release CN. Let's say if I want to initialize only the last 3 or like releases, so I can initialize it in any manner. I don't really bother about the order of these keys. So I just initialize CF 2021, 2023, and CF 2018, and I initialize it to this right-hand struct, and it automatically sets the 2021 to Project Stratus, 2018 to Aether, and 2023 to Fortuna. And let's say we have a use case where we know that something like CF 2019. So ColdFusion was not released in 2019 as a release. So we know that those kind of values are not there. So we can even put a default value for this, like not released in this year. So we know when we are assigning this, or let's say if this is coming from a third party API, we know this value is not going to be there. But certainly we can assign this value so that if we want to print it in our code, it's going to assign this value. Excuse me. The other use case can be renaming a variable, right? So let's say we don't even know what was the CF latest, and we have just assigned to a dummy value like ZS and all. But we know that when we get the data from a third party API or from an object CF release CN, we are pretty sure that this variable can be initialized, because we know that last latest release was 2023 only. So you can initialize to that. So what it will do is it will check the entry like Fortuna for CF 2023, and it will initialize the CF latest to Fortuna, right? So this functionality can also be done. You don't need to care about some wrong values or some values missing in this. And then there comes another use case where you want only the last 3 releases, including the current release. Okay, and you don't need to bother about the earlier releases. So you can always specify using the rest operator. So you assign the values that were the 3 last versions, and the rest operator for that. And so what it will do is it will initialize these 3 variables to these three values to these 3 variables, and rest will be initialized for CF 2016 region and to CF 2018 ether, these values. So yeah. So enough about destructuring aspect, the recap, because we implemented it in 2021. Let's talk about function parameter destructuring, why it's required and is it really necessary. So we have a function, we have taken a function here which is print CF release names, and there we are accepting parameters CF 2025 and CF 2023 here. And let's say when we want to invoke that, like we had, so CF release CN is a struct that we were having here, and we can pass on these values like 2025, because we know 2025 is the first parameter, 2023 is the second parameter, so we can pass on, and it's going to appropriately print those values which are correct in that sense. But what if while invoking the function I am messed up with the order of invocation? So what I did was that instead of passing first parameter to be 2025, I just did 2023. So here the names or release code names will get swapped, right? Now, one way to deal with that is go for named parameters. But named parameters, I think to certain extent, like if those are 2-3 parameters, it looks good. And those, if those are simple parameters, they look great in that sense. But what about the complex aspect, right? If I know that my object or the variables or the values that I'm trying to initialize are very complex and are nested in deep, right? So for that, it's always better that instead of passing this, I just mention a destructuring object where in this I have mentioned CF 2025 and CF 2023. You just extract these values for me and discards the rest, right? So then while calling this function, if I've written this function in this manner and I'm just passing CF release CN as a complex object, right? So it's automatically going to get initialized the correct values for this. So it will automatically go into that object, retrieve the value of CF 2025 attribute, retrieve the value of CF 2023 attribute, and assigns the rest attribute to whatever older versions or other versions that are there. So that's where you don't need to handle too many complexities about it. And basically with this, the good thing is that let's say if we have been taking it in an object in a struct and then doing the dot notation, then we might be checking for null values whether that key exists or not. We don't need to do it, right? And the only scopes that are being defined here is 2025, CF 2023, and rest variable, and not beyond that. So yeah, then taking another example for destructuring, function destructuring. So let's say when we go with the conventional approach, so we have a student struct which has name and age attributes with certain values defined. Then we have scored struct for which we have 3 other subjects values that are there. That's a complex object that we have created. And in this example, what I'm going to do is I am going to display the summary of a student object. So I define 2 functions. So my first function is without destructuring. Okay, so let's say this is what I'm expecting, a student kind of object. So if I have to, let's say, output the names, maths, English, science score, the way I have to go is, have that struct, get that key student.name, student.scores.math. So I need to be aware of this path and again do a repeated. So it's like too much kind of repeated code, and that is what, and student.age, right? So this is what I can do using, like, if we are not using destructuring. With destructuring, what we can do is, like, I just need to define this object in a way, the values that I'm going to retrieve, name, and then maths, English, science. And the good thing is, think about this social, right? So social, if you see, I didn't pass it because this value is not even there in the struct, but I don't know, right? But here, if I know that, okay, some value that is not coming in from an object and I want to initialize a default value, I can always give that attribute a default value, which is 20. And here, just by giving this thing and passing the student object, I am going to initialize the name, maths, English, science, as well as social score for this, right? And even I can, and here, if you see, since I have not defined the age object or age attribute in my destructuring, so this is not accessible. If I try to output, it will say age is not defined. So that's how destructuring works. Now coming to thread functionality enhancements that we did. So threading is always complex, and like sometimes when we write the code, we don't want to touch it if it works fine. But herein, with the recent runtime that we are moving forward to with the next release, that is JDK 21, it is supporting the support for stopping threads. And if we see thread.stop functionality in Java, it was deprecated since early 2000s, I would say, and but it was not being removed. And with JDK 21, they have completely removed that functionality. And the reason that they have given is, like, basically when people were extensively using it, they were leaving the monitors or unnecessary attributes of certain threads in a inconsistent state, which was getting difficult to manage. So basically, to give them more control, what they are providing is, you cannot stop the threads, but you can control it via interrupt. So interrupt is a kind of flag that you can set via thread API, the JDK API, and JDK will automatically take care of handling it and gracefully shutting down, and making sure that values or different values or monitors and variables are not leaving in an inconsistent state, right? So that is what, and basically with that, we have also provided the support for graceful termination via interrupts. But interrupts doesn't guarantee that when you interrupt a thread, it's going to be stopped right away. It's a best case effort. Okay, it doesn't guarantee immediate stop. It can stop, it cannot, depending on whether the thread is sleeping or doing something, or it's in a state where it's just waiting and all. So for that, like, to provide the interrupts, we have exposed methods as well as tag attributes to send interrupts to the CF thread. We have exposed the following methods: interrupt thread with thread name as parameter, and we have provided the overloaded versions for that. So there's a version wherein even thread name is not required. So if you are in a current thread and using that thread only you want to interrupt, you can just invoke the interrupt thread without a thread name, and it's going to interrupt the current thread. And then we have provided a functionality, is thread interrupted, using which you can check whether the thread has been interrupted or not. And this is where CFML developers responsibility comes into picture, that what needs to be done when the thread has been interrupted or when it has not been interrupted. If certain cleanups or certain handling needs to be done, that is where we need to change the code. Okay, and we are going to display it as well. In terms of text syntax, we have provided an action, which is an interrupt action. So you can always specify action equal to interrupt, the name of the thread name, and using that, it's going to just set the flag that this thread needs to be interrupted. Thread terminate was a function that we have been exposing for long, and since JDK 21 has stopped the support for that, so now this thread terminate method has been removed. So like, once we switch to the newest version, we'll be no longer be going to use it with this functionality. So just to go into a bit of details about what usually happens with CF thread. So if when we create a CF thread and we have not started, so there are certain states that a thread manages. So let's say initially when we just create a thread, it's in the non-started state, and then when we assigned the action is run, it is in the running state, so it can go and it can continuously run or do the task and all. And after that, it can go to either waiting. When it is waiting for certain resources, it can go for completion as well. And the way we were handling is, let's say these are the three threads, T1, T2, T3. And when we were earlier invoking the thread terminate T3, it was actually terminating this thread. So there was nothing like that this thread will keep on waiting or so. It's going to be definitely get terminated. Now with the functionality that we are having, okay, with the newest release, uh, thread terminate functionality is not there. We are going to do an interrupt thread with a thread name, okay. And again, two things can happen. The running thread can either keep on running, that is like it is doing something and it will wait until it gets terminated, or it can directly get terminated as well. So we are unsure about which states it's going to be, because it doesn't guarantee that thread is going to get terminated. And that is where ColdFusion developers responsibility comes into the picture, that they have to gracefully handle those situations on what needs to be done. So yeah, thinking about developers point of view, so this is how earlier it used to be. So let's say we have created a thread and we are running it with certain attributes and all, and we are just giving a sleep of 10 seconds or so, and then we have written this code, okay. And let's say when we were doing thread terminates, it's going to get stop terminate. But with interrupt thread, it's a possibility that thread doesn't get interrupted. So from that point of view, the fellow developer who is writing this kind of code should write the logic in a way that he can check whether is thread interrupted. If the thread has been interrupted, then you can gracefully exit. Or if the thread has not been interrupted, after sending that interrupt thread signal, you can do some let's say if you want to pass on a message, or you want to print some kind of pop-up or message, or do some graceful handling writing to a file, that can be handled by invoking this piece of code. So this piece of code will be newly added by the developer. Next, coming to query caching. So caching, I think it's always nice to have, and almost every application do use the caching functionality. As with respect to the query caching, earlier we were using only the cached within, cached after attributes, and that too could not be used together, which was kind of weird that we found. And we have provided the functionality because I think there can be certain scenario wherein a user, let's say, trying to launch a website, wants to do a caching after a certain point of time, and you want to do it for a certain span of time, right? So both the attributes can be used together. So but if with these attributes, what I really feel is, or what we really felt was that caching is kind of constant, that there's a particular timestamp that you have defined using which we are going to cache the query. It's not going to depend on the cache access patterns. That, let's say, if we have some kind of functionality where the corresponding query is getting used again and again, so we don't want to have a particularly absolute point of time where it can get evicted. It can be dependent on, if the query has been used now, you can cache it for, let's say, another 10 seconds. So that is where the cache max idle time attributes come into the picture. And we have added the support for cache max idle time attribute in the CF query. It enables the query to be cached as long as it is requested. So let's say if the last requested pattern is at 7 seconds and I have the cache max idle time to be 8 seconds, so then this query will be in the cache for 15 more seconds, right? Or a total of 15 seconds, right? And cache within, like the functionality that we had, it just enabled the query to be cached for a fixed span of time, no matter what its access pattern is all about. But using this, we can do a lot more, and that can be a certain use case for developers as well. And after implementing these things, I like, we thought about that even someone can have a use case where they might be able to use all the three attributes based on that. Okay, so those can be used as of now. Just trying to explain the difference between cache max idle time and cached within. So let's say query access happens at 0 seconds and I have my cached within is 7 seconds. No matter how many times the query access is there between this pattern, it's definitely going to get evicted from the query cache after 7 seconds, right? But if I talk about cache max idle time of 6 seconds, if let's say my query gets accessed at 4 seconds, then it's going to be kept in cache till 10 seconds. Like it's going to get evicted only after 10 seconds if it's not being used. Let's say if it's getting used again at 7 seconds, then it's going to extend for 6 more seconds, that is 13. So that is where the both the attributes differ, and it has I believe that cache max idle time has certain more use cases considering the current paradigm that we are having. So yeah, then talking about CF property, so we have had these enhancement requests wherein CF properties, and I'm sure many developers use that. The default value attributes that we were having was only having a constant value, which is a string that can be initialized. So I think developers might be handling it in a very complicated manner if they want to assign the dynamic values. But certainly this becomes a use case where you want to initialize the default values based on some dynamic values. It can be an expression and all. So that is where we thought that this default value can be initialized as a CFML expression itself. So you can give any complex kind of expression to initialize this. And default values, the way we have implemented this functionality is that default values are lazily initialized only when needed. If it's not requested or if it's not needed, it won't get initialized. Earlier, the constant strings that we were having, those were getting eager initialized. So those were, no matter whether you access them or not, those were getting initialized. But here it are lazily initialized. So you can provide a struct or an array or any complex structure, like you can even use the elvis operator and let's say ternary operator, and it actually simplifies the post initialization code as well. So you don't need to write a complex logic of doing initialization and all. You can just do it in the where you define the property itself. So just to give a snapshot, like this is what it is. So here, if you see, right, I have initialized, like we have initialized it as an array. It can be an empty struct. It can be a current timestamp. It can be based on, this operator itself. It can be based on certain conditions. Okay, and it can be expression. It can be even a function call. So those can be initialized. Now, let's take an example here. So if we see here, right, we have the code for this, and there if you see, we have taken multiple of the scenarios. Like here it's the constant string, then arrays, then if you want to invoke the complex function, those are also there. So all these kind of things are there which were not there, and using that, if I want to just initialize those things with default values, I get the results right away. Okay, only when it is requested. Then let's talk about some new constructs that we had. So one is trailing commas. So nowadays, many languages do support trailing commas as well in their syntax, and where the use cases that basically when you do want to do a copy pasting stuff, you want to modify, reorder the items. Okay, you don't want to run into the syntax error, or let's say something that gets messed up in while copying pasting. So all these things can be taken care of. It just ignores and it consumes it in a better manner to understand it appropriately. The version control system would also produce cleaner diffs after this thing. Okay, and trailing commas are allowed in array, struct literals, parameter definition, function calls, array and object restructuring. But yeah, there is a limitation that these are not allowed after rest parameter, because rest is the end. Otherwise, we cannot get to know if there is some other values aside. So it's not allowed in any language. So let's take some code snippets. So this is how it looks like. You can have it in the arrays, then in the structs, and then even in the function calls. Then we have, we have had this enhancement that some of the developers have raised, that why do we want to write multiple catch clauses and all? Can't we, if we have some common exception messages or common exception handling logic, can't we just club that as an arguments and all? So we have implemented the support for that. So now multiple exceptions can be handled using a single catch block. You just need to specify the exception type separated by a pipe sign. Okay, it eliminates the duplicate code because you don't need to write the code again and again. and enhances the efficiency as well as readability. Apart from that, the bytecode that gets generated by writing this kind of logic is more optimal because you don't get to repeat those steps again and again. Syntax for script and tag are as shown below. So in the script syntax, if you see, you can specify just by pipe signs those exceptions. You can write the logic. Okay, and in the tag format, you can specify type equal to and separated by the pipe sign. And mind you, but these things can be done, but you cannot club the any because any is the base of every exception. So that's going to be then a kind of error only, right? So that is where it is. So here I'm simulating it with an example. So let's say here I've taken an example of 5 by 0, which is a divide by 0 exception. And let's say for this kind of exception, if my application throws, I want to handle in a certain different manner. And apart from that, like if it's not a divide by 0 exception, I want to handle it in certain like I want to display some other message to my user and all. And finally, I want to close it, right? So if I do this, what it does is like it's going to get cached in this clause itself, and then it's going to output the application was unable to perform required application, and please write this thing, and the exception message is divide by 0. You'll get to know that, and after that you can just output what is there in the finally clause. Now coming to operators. So yeah, Elvis and null coalescing. So Elvis, I think many of the developers use, and it has been revised, but certain developers had some concerns about the behavior of Elvis operator, in the sense that our Elvis operator was kind of combined or mix of Elvis as well as null coalescing operator. But when we look at and when we check the implementation, it's up to the language implementers, right? Like Kotlin implements in a way where it's a combined effort of Elvis and null combined in one operator itself. Then there are languages which implement it in a different. And just to cater to writing more clean and kind of code, what we did is we have separated the null coalescing operator from Elvis. So we have implemented the null coalescing operator as a separate operator, which is only for null values, and Elvis is only for what you call as truthy values, right? And Elvis and ternary operator optimizations also we did a bit. So they are now fail-safe operator. And what I mean by fail-safe is that, let's say if there is an exception, right, in that sense also, it's going to initialize to an appropriate value. It's not that it throws that exception that variable is not defined and you need to do a try catch. So it's kind of, some people have to write some additional piece of code, which can now be eliminated. CFML Elvis operator implementation still goes with truthy values. So that is what we have stick to our approach. For null values, we have implemented null coalescing operator specified by 2 question mark sign. And we have also optimized the bytecode generation, thereby producing reducing the number of classes that were generated per Elvis operator. So when I talk about fail-safe operator, right? So just let's try to simulate it with an example. So let's say this is my struct. That is, it's a complex kind of struct. Okay. And let's say I am going to use the Elvis operator and I'm trying to retrieve a value department which doesn't exist. This key doesn't exist. So earlier what used to happen is when we used to write this kind of code, it just was throwing an exception. Okay. But as usual, like, Elvis is a kind of decision making operator. So basically we just want to check that this is not a truthy value. So just assign the right hand side. So those things have been taken care of. So now it will print no information of that. And the code for that is like the one, the generated code is like this one that we have done. Now, coming to the Elvis operator, optimization that we did. So let me try to simulate it with a sample example. So consider this piece of code where we have 2 closures, get foo and get bar, and then we tried Elvis operator. So basically, it checks whether get bar returns true value. If it does, then it prints that, and if it's a false value, then it prints the hello, and we just output the Elvis And similarly, the similar functionality can be simulated for ternary, right? So if we look at the kind of code that was generated earlier for that, so first let's look at the number of classes that were getting generated. So we were having two classes for closures like get bar and get foo, and we were having this main class generated for this piece of code that we have written. And earlier, another class that was specifically generated for Elvis operator, and it used to contain certain piece of code which we have right now eliminated, and the only classes that will be generated are the closure class and the main code class. So that logic has been appropriately handled, and I am pretty sure that it's going to reduce the number of classes that are being produced, because earlier Elvis operator was generating one class per operator. Okay, so thereby reducing the space size as well. Okay, now coming to null coalescing operator, right? So we implemented the null coalescing operator in CFML, and the way it works is that it checks whether the specified object is null or not and returns the non-null value. The syntax is being defined using the two question mark operator. So here is this value variable. If it's null, then it's going to return the default value. If it's not null, then it's going to return whatever value is there. And that's how it behaves. While Elvis works with Truthi, it null coalescing works on null values. So that's how the syntax looks like in case of null coalescing. So let me try to simulate this with an example of how the behavior of Elvis and null coalescing operator is different. So let me take this example of 0, false, no, and null. So if you see here, so these are kind of non-truthy values. Okay, so that's why when it says arguments dot well, it's trying to fetch these values, and those are non-truthy values. So it's going to output true, 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 true in all the cases. But when we check these things, apart from the port value, every other value is non-null, right? So it's going to display 0, false, no. And after that, when it's null, it's going to output the true. So that's where the behavior, varies. Then, like last but not the least, there are some dump enhancements that we have done. So dump is always a nice to have utility where, when we write some piece of code, we want to understand, or let's say when we want to debug that information, it's a nice utility that you can use. So dump utility now has been enhanced to contain Java class information. It is containing this classes that are the functions that are attributed with this classes, associated with this classes, constructor information, the exception types. We also cleaned up some redundant information which we felt is not relevant to the CF developer. Like in certain of the scenarios, let's say when we are trying to initialize, it was giving the methods of the object class of Java, which was we felt was not required, right? So in this, if you see, when we try to input, dump the value of an integer value class, it gives us all the values of the integer classes that are there in Java. Apart from that, it also gives the parent classes which are contracted. You can expand that, so you can even refer to what all methods exist. But yeah, definitely non-redundant information that was there has been redundant information has been removed. So with this, let's go forward with some demo. Right, so yeah, so let's start with query caching first. Okay, so if we see, here is where we are going to have a query caching. So let's try to find out first of all with query caching. So I have this thing, and when I execute this, it's just trying to fetch some value, and it is saying it's not cached, and it is giving the current timestamp, which is 23/19/36, right? And here, that is what I can modify this to an extent that it is, let's say, 50, and I am going to cache that. So now, no, it actually exceeded. So let me go with 23/20.
Hey, Ashu, I'm sorry to interrupt. Could you make your font just a teensy-weensy bit bigger? It's a little bit tiny, I think, on a few people's screens.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. There we go. Yeah, that's a little bit better. Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, so it was not cached. Now, since it has exceeded the 20th second, now it became cached, right? And it will remain cached because I've specified the cached value to be of 5 seconds. Now, if I have to validate whether my cached max idle time attitude works or not, so let's say 36 seconds, we are going to execute this query after 41 seconds, and this going to give me the cache to be as false. So let's say if I execute this, tells me that this is false, right? And this is because I have specified the cache max idle time to be 5 seconds here, and the cached after value I specified to be at 2320, the timestamp that I am having, right? Uh, Next, let's go to the built-in functions. Okay, so in built-in functions, let's go for, let's say, struct value array first. Okay, so struct value array, if I go with this, so this is my struct which is containing about these things. So there was a way to retrieve all the keys, but here I'm looking for all these values, right? So let me just click that, and the struct keys that I printed were there, and you can get the array of struct value arrays just by invoking the struct value array function. Okay, now let's talk about the property string as well. So property string is where we are trying to create. So this is what my struct looks like here. It has certain keys like Google, Microsoft, Apple, and these are the values, and we are trying to write this to a file. Okay, and when we actually do that, so let me do. So if you see, it has created this file out properties, and it has actually created a case sensitive struct which has this key and values that are there. And if I want to look at this file, this is being created in fileout.properties, and this is what, right? So it just got created right now, 2322. And in my scenario that we were having, so I try to retrieve the value of a get property string that was Apple. And did I get the value of for key Apple? Yes, it was Mac1. So yeah, so this is what built-in function. Let's take another built-in function. So yeah, so let's talk about first of all, create object. So my ColdFusion instance is running for sure, and let me try to create an object. So there is this one object of sample class that is already placed in CFusion lib, that is in the class path. So it's going to output the value of that object. The print function will get invoked. But when I try to do for CF developers, right? CF developers is a class that I've created, but I have not compiled it as such. So let's see what it does when we try to create object of this class. So the first call will succeed, but the second call will definitely fail, right? So it says that, for the first class, it said that the sample object dot print. So it's able to, because in sample.java, what I was doing is, hello world, and I am located at this. So it just mentioned this information. But when it's trying to do a CF developer class invocation, it failed. So now let's do this thing that we are going to dynamically compile this CF developers.java. We are not, restarting the ColdFusion. We just compiled this code, CF developers, and it created this class. Okay. And now when I invoke this, okay. Yeah, CF developers. Yeah. Somehow it was, okay. I think it got cached, and that's why, otherwise it's going to get loaded. Let me try that again once. Okay. So let me invoke this. Yeah, and it fails. And let me again, so it generated the class. And when I invoke it, it said hello ColdFusion developer. So it's automatically able to load it, right? I didn't do anything when I got an exception. I just compiled the class, it got generated, and it got loaded. let's see if we can have some other thing in built-in functions. So this we already covered. Yeah, duplicates. So duplicate functionality. So when we talked about this, so like I said, right, I mean, we have a person object struct that is there, and then it has some street value to be 20. And then we are creating the object, like a deep copy as well as shallow copy. And then we are changing the object address, the original object address to be from 20 to 22, because this is my change address function. And once that has been changed, we'll see what are the values in the original object, as well as deep copy object as well as shallow copy object. So when I output that, yeah, when I output that duplicate, so yeah, if I see, so I saw that I am able to change the street value to 22 in the original object, which is of person type. In the deep copy object, the value remains of the earlier, which was pointing to 20, because it make the copy by copy of individual attributes, and it was not pointing to the references. But when we do a shallow copy, it is pointing to the original object, because after doing a shallow copy here, I have changed the address, and I can clearly see that it is pointing to the newest address. So yeah, I think that's what we have for built-in functions. Now, anything else? Yeah. Now, coming to the destructuring part. Yeah. So in destructuring, let me showcase. So first thing is, I just wanted to show how easy it is to swap those variables. You generally write 3 lines of code to swap the values from A to B, right? You'll assign it to a temporary variables. Here, what we are doing is A equal to 10 and B equal to 20, and we just wrote this. And we'll see what are the values of A and B right now. So if we do, so it is like A value is 20 and B value is 10. Okay. So these have been swapped just by a single function, single line of code. Now let's talk about the destructuring exercise that we were having. So like I said, right, I mean, in this, we have the CF release code name assigned as a struct. And here is what we are retrieving. So CF 2021, 2023, 2018, and 2019. I am not extracting the 2025 value. And then if I'm trying to print this destructuring, what I am getting is 2019 not released. So we have provided a default value for this. So it prints that it is not released in this year because this was not there in my struct. The 2021 value should be assigned to project status. That is their 2023 to Fortuna. And then the other simulation that we were doing, that, changing the release name. So here is where I have defined a variable CF last, which is ether, right? And then I assign CF last to this. So whatever value related to CF 2023 is there in the this struct, CF last will be assigned to that. So we'll see what is the value of CF last. So it says Fortuna, right? And apart from that, since we had the rest operator, so in this, what we are doing is that out of supported scenarios, so we just did initialization of these 3. So apart from that, the other 2 that are there, that is 2018 and 2016, that will get assigned to the rest. And that is what we see here. 2016 and 2018 region and ether are getting assigned. Let's take another example. What we can take, this thing, right? So this example we saw there in the struct, right? So function destructuring, that's CFM. So here what's happening, let's first talk about it, right? So I am having a student complex object, then display summary. This is going to get invoked without destructuring and with destructuring. So without destructuring, if I see, right, I'm able to get the values of name, student name, maths, English, and science. So those are there, that name, maths, English, science score is there. Okay. But with destructuring, I'm going to initialize it in this manner. And here, if you see, I have given a social value. Let's say if I changed it to 25, right now, and social is not getting passed, but still we are able to, you know, print that to 25. And one interesting aspect is, if you see, right, that age, if I try to print here, so age, if you see, it's not there in the destructuring object, so it won't get initialized. So when I actually execute it, it says variable age is undefined because I never scoped it in the destructuring, right? So that's how destructuring works. Then we can have a combination of these attributes as well. So it cannot, it's not essential that there is going to be only one destructuring object. There it can have multiple, so you can pass on that as well. And yeah, let's take another nested destructuring example. So here, if there is a complex object, and the only thing that I'm doing is name, country, city, and the latitude and longitude values. So when I print on these nested destructuring, what I'm seeing is that, yeah, it assigns the name values correctly. Name values as well as city, latitude, and longitude has been assigned, as well as country. Now, just to make sure that, let's try to output coordinates. See, coordinates is not a leaf node. It has the attributes. So definitely this is not scoped. So this won't get defined. So if I do it, it says coordinates is undefined. So that's how, destructuring works. Let me take, constructs example. First of all, right? So if you see, let me take multiple catch exception first. So here, let me do this, right? I mean, let's do a file not found exception. Okay, and this is a divide by zero exception, right? So, and here I'm catching file not found exception. So it should not come to this clause, but it should come to this clause. And let me execute that multi exception catch. So if you see, division by zero is what the exception message, because I am trying to exception the message. So it came to this and any exception, and then thank you for visiting, all the messages that I've outputted. So all that is there. Now let me actually change this file not found to divide by zeros to check it out whether this divide by it actually catches that or not. So when I execute that, you see a totally different message. So it comes to this construct, this code snippet clause, there it says the application was unable to perform a required operation this way, and please try again later. And it also prints the exception message because we tried printing that. So that is what trailing commas we do have, and we are printing it based on the structs certain. So we have applied a trailing comma here, and we'll see there's no exception. And even this is supported in destructuring. So if you see P and Q values, we have initialized to something, an object that is there. And if we see here, the P value will get initialized to 42, right? So let me check that. So yeah, if you see, the P value is initialized to 42 and all this thing works. There is no exception that we are getting here. Now coming to what else we are having. Yeah, multi-assign. Go to attributes. Yeah, attributes we already covered. We go to multi-assign, right? So multi-assign, when we actually go, so if you see this expression, right? So you see, right? I mean, here I've written these all complex sort of expressions. So a plus equal to b. So what it does is, now the a value will be 3 plus 2, which is 5. C value is 5 less than 4, which is no. And b value is 2. So if I execute this multi-assign here, so if you see 5, 2, and no. So this can be done for multiple other operators. So it is being supported here. Similar you can do with any expression you want to put. It's in the while loop or for where an expression is expected, you can do it. Next, let's go to QOQ, right? Yeah, so QOQ, when we go to QOQ, so I've done a modulus operation. So I've given this value as 40, and let's say I'm doing a modulus 6 here. So because my query.foo is 40 and 40 mod 6 is like it should go 4. So this is what value is initialized. So all these operator works fine. You can even do bitwise operations if you want. So all the bitwise operations that we are having in this, right? So we can do that. So this is foo and operation, not operations or an or operation. So all these are supported now. You can do that. Next is coming to threads. Yeah, let's talk about threads thing. So yeah, so this is what we were having. So we have this piece of code which is in the running state, and we have given a thread name T2 to this. Okay, it is running, and what it does, it sleeps for a certain time, and then there is a try catch clause. We are trying to interrupt this thread with the thread name that we have assigned T2. Okay, we are giving a sleep of, let's say, 1 second, and let's see what it does, right? So let's see interrupt sleeping thread here. So when we execute, so there is some thing. So it just outputs something like, before interrupt, and then it does thread T2 is running, basically, because this is the status of it was running because we have not interrupted. Then we did the thread interrupt, and what is the does is after interrupt that it says, thread T2 is completed. So it went to a completion state here, right? Then we again try to see the state and whether my thread is interrupted or not. So it says, okay, is the thread interrupted? So using that flag and that function that we are having is thread interrupted, you can check that this thread is indeed interrupted, and whatever exception that it has thrown, those exception we are setting in the error message here because it has interrupted. So it might have thrown some exception, thread interrupted exception. We are not doing what you call as exception handling here, a decent handling. So it's going to throw an exception, and there is where it showed that thread, the exception type is like thread interrupted exception and thread interrupted by another thread, right? So this is a normal case of thread interruption where we are not doing any exception handling or any graceful handling, right? The other example that I have showcased was that while a thread is there and it is running, and what it is doing, it is running and doing something. Okay, so what you can do is you can place this logic and check whether the thread is interrupted or not. If thread is interrupted, well, it's fine. Till the time it's not interrupted, you can just set the message to some counter or some additional handling that you have to do, and it just goes to do that, and that you can output, right? So let me check about interrupt thread here. So when we said interrupt thread, right? So let's see how it works. So I have initially given the timestamp and check whether the thread is interrupted. So it will say no, because we have not interrupted it. Then we again check the timestamp, then we sleep for 1 second, and then we try to interrupt that. Okay, and even after interrupting thread, it was not there. Then we said after interrupt, we check whether the thread is interrupted. We check for this thread that yes, it is indeed interrupted, right? Because its interrupt is actually showing the status of that. And after that, it is waiting for joining this. And after that, we are checking the state of that thread, and it says, okay, the thread has been completed now, right? So that's how it is about the thread. But basically, this is what a fellow developer has to do a graceful handling if he wants to do certain other things when the thread gets interrupted, because there's no sure shot this thing promise that once you do a thread interrupt, it's going to get terminated right away. So yeah, let me check if something else. So yeah, operators. Yeah, let's talk about operators once. Yeah. So in this Elvis operator, right, like I showed earlier that this department is undefined. So earlier it used to throw an exception that this is undefined. Now if I execute elvis.cfm, it shows me that no information. So basically it has initialized the right hand expression because this is a non-truthy value, right? It's not a truthy value. So it doesn't throw an exception. Now the code generation part. So that is what, like if I have to showcase that, yeah, let me clear some classes. Okay, so these are the classes that I've cleared, and let's see how many number of classes this code generates, right? So we have two closures which will then generate their own closure classes, and then we have the main class. And let me execute this. So when I execute this, so it does what it has to. That the it just Elvis goes to get bar. Get bar is actually executing this, printing this inside bar, and it is returning a bar. So it will say inside bar, then bar, which is returned. And then let's say in the ternary also the similar functionality happens, that it calls the get foo. So get foo will print inside foo. It's going to return foo. Okay, and then you are going to output. So all that is being outputted here, but we'll see the number of classes that are being generated. So if you see here, only two closure class and one is the main class that is getting generated, right? So that is what, no additional classes is there, only this piece of code has been generated, right? So it's just the 2 lines of code. So in that manner, memory footprint is definitely reduced. Now let's talk about null coalescing here. Okay, so null coalescing, basically a simple way is, you can put this null, and let's see how it works. So when the value we initialize to null, it is printing the default string. This is for Elvis. Yeah, but we can, because yeah. So if you see, it is printing default string and 0 value here. 0 is because it's a non-null value, right? So it has printed the 0 value here because it's a non-null. Here, since it was null, it is printing default string. So that's how it is. The other thing that we can do is, let's say, we are seeing the behavior of this, right? So let's see what it prints right now. Variable null is undefined, right? So because I have not used this thing, but a JavaCast null. So but let's see what it does for this. And if you see, it gives 0 false no for this, and where it's going to give a null value, it's going to return true. So yeah. And yeah, finally coming to dump utility. So I have a dump examples.cfm wherein I have a simple integer value that I have defined. So let's see what it outputs. So when I output this, so it's going to give me the integer class that is there, what all methods, what all constructors are there, what all methods are there, what all fields are there, as well as if you want to know the parent class of that gets expanded, all its constructors, methods are showcase. So yeah, so that's all I have. Let me see if some demo is left. Yeah, CF properties, right? Yeah, so CF property is another example that is left. So if we see, we have assigned some complex value initialization, and what we are doing is we are creating the object for that. We are going to iterate and print those things. Okay, so if I print the property.cfm, if you see all the dynamically loaded values, right, that are there, so those are getting displayed. So it's not going to be constant right now. You can do a dynamic value evaluation as well. So yeah, that's all I have any questions, feel free to ask.
Awesome. Thank you, Ashu. Yeah, let's get some more questions. Is optional chaining a thing in CF? And the answer was yes, we do. We have a safe nav operator. We had Vikas answer that. Did you want to add anything to that question, Ashu?
What? Which one?
If you go down to the Q&A pod, it's the first question from Ryan P. He says, is optional chaining a thing in CF? Seems like the Elvis operator implies optional chaining now. And then, yeah. And yeah. So Nimit and Vikas answered that one. Do we have any other questions? I know there's a lot of complex things here, and probably a lot of you will want to play with this before having questions. So do keep in mind the very last of our series is a specific Q&A. So if you're playing with this over the next week, spend this weekend doing a little coding, and you come up on questions, definitely bring those. The engineers will be there to answer questions at that particular time. That is on the 18th of December at 9 a.m. in this spot. All right. Jesse says, oh, I have to go. Thank you for letting me hang out. Awesome, Jesse. Thanks for coming. Anybody else? Questions, comments, concerns, fun things? Yeah, Dave says, I need to play with this stuff first. Totally true. Yeah, I mean, it really is a little overwhelming just to see, like, you probably have to get your hands on it, throw some actual data or workflows at it, and kind of get a feel for what it can do. Totally understand. Keep in mind also that we do have the forums. We have the forums for the beta, and there's a language feature subforum in there. If you do run into questions prior to the 18th, Ashu's in there, I'm in there, the whole team is in there. Thank you, Charlie. Yeah, just head over to the Adobe pre-release. If you are not in the beta, let me know, please. There's definitely ways to get in. It's free. It's available to everyone. It's an open beta. So definitely join up, download, try it, and get in there with us to test all this stuff out. And there's way more than just language features. We've got a bunch more webinars coming up next week. We're done for this week. We had them starting Monday every single day. So we're giving you Friday off from that. But next week, we will definitely have some more. So I will actually be staying here for a little while longer. If anybody does have a question or wants to chat, I'll be here for another 15 minutes or so before I close down. And probably we'll see some of the engineers still here for a little bit as well. So otherwise, thank you all for coming. And thank you, Ashu, for an amazing, super complicated and deep discussion about the new language features. I'm super excited. I know a lot of other people are super excited too. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining. And I would like to say, just please try out these features and let us know how it works. And the pre-release forums are always there for any issues or any behaviors that you would like to do. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, everyone. Definitely get in there, ask questions, break it. Yeah. We want you to break it. Hit it with a hammer. We want to see. We do not have a poll today. So we do not have a poll today. We figured enough polling for the week. Polls will start up again starting Monday at Monday's session. I think there's a session Monday. I have to double check, but next week. So no polls. Yep, we're good. We are good. Awesome. Okay, well, I'm going to pop off the video and turn off my mic, but I will still be here in the chat, so I am not going away quite yet. But I will relieve you from the eye burn of my shirt. All right.
Yeah, okay. I'll also